Yesterday I had a problem because after a day of conference and the initial panel talk, I realized that I completely redo my slides because because there were new insights that I got from discussions that I had been having throughout the day, and I didn't want to wait a year to share them with you. So I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and was working on restructuring it and bringing it all in. But I'm really excited about it because I think it's much better than the one before. So I'm really, and I think I've got some really interesting ideas to share. So, but what I'm going to try to do today is to answer this one really important question that I know that you've all been having for years now. It's like, when can we finally bring Clippy back? And I think this is what AI is about, right? It's about creating a tool that will proactively tell you what you need to know so that you don't make mistakes that you don't even realize that you're about to make. And there's a whole lot of pit traps, and I won't talk too much about those. I've got a blog post series about that, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But this talk is more going to be about the basic frameworks and ideas that can help you with this journey, and then also the technologies that I think you'll need. But first, a quick introduction. Keep it short. I'm Christophe van Tomme. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Pronovix. We're a 30 people strong Drupal consultancy. We build documentation tools basically in open source software. Lately, like for 5 years, I've been going to these conferences, and we did very, very little DITA actually. We've had a few projects where we transformed DITA and then imported into Drupal. But now the last year, we've been really ramping up on developer documentation, API portals, so developer portals. So that's basically my background. And because of that, I'm thinking a lot about APIs and documentation and kind of like the forefront of documentation and where we're all going. But to start my story, I need to go back a little bit because once upon a time, this was what documentation was about. It was about manuals, it was about books and these carefully curated, well thought out publications that people would put out. And for all the magnificence that they were, they've been a little bit under attack lately because Agile came along and suddenly you were putting out products like not quarterly or yearly, but monthly, weekly, or sometimes daily, or even multiple times a day. End users got used to the internet and have no attention whatsoever anymore. And all of this is kind of like undermining centralized manuals and this central paradigm that we've been used to in our industry. And I think that they're no longer enough, and we need to look for new ways of doing documentation. And Chris talked about that this morning also. Yeah. So luckily, books and documents are, if you look back from an anthropological perspective, books and documents are fairly new things. Actually, if you look throughout history, this is not how we used to teach people things. We used to teach people things through conversations, by talking to each other and explaining, looking over the shoulder and kind of helping each other out. Maybe some lectures, but I think in the early days, I don't think people were doing any lectures at all. I think even that is a fairly new invention. And it looks like we're going to go back to the past, or back to the future, or whichever. and it looks like the past and the future of documentation is going to be a conversation. And I think there's a space for manuals, but I think that there's going to be a big shift back now in coming years. But first, let's talk a little bit about some frameworks to think about this. Because I see 3 trends that are happening right now. And there's probably more, but these are 3 that I find particularly interesting. And these are some of the things that I brought into my slide deck this morning. First of all, there's a massive context shift happening. What I mean with that is that we're moving from this download and study the manual to a stream and learn as you go kind of way. And this is, as I said earlier, that's not new. It's something we've been doing in the past, but we're doing it much more consciously now, and we have a lot more tools for doing that. The really important repercussion of this is that we're moving from book context to user context. And this is what hit me yesterday. It's like, wow, the whole Open Toolkit is all about resolving book context. And that's not going to work anymore, because we're moving towards the context of one single person, one single environment, one single prehistory, and being able to serve the right documentation with the right parameters, the right links to additional information, prerequisites and postrequisites for that one single person. And we're not ready for that. That's one thing we're not ready for. And I think that was like a major kind of like, wow, okay, this is big, and I need to share this. The second one, this is something that I had in my slides before, is flowing. And I don't know, anybody read this book, The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly? It's if you don't know Kevin Kelly, you should go and check him out. He's a really interesting person, great ideas. And this book is about 12 patterns, 12 trends that he's seeing happening in technology and how they're going to affect us as a population. He's not predicting what's going to happen, so he's not making predictions, but he's saying what are the trends that you're already seeing, like the undercurrents that are happening that are going to drive us towards the future. He doesn't really know what that's going to be like. You know, is it going to be this tool or that tool that's going to win? He doesn't talk about that, but he talks about this change. And one of them is this change from documents to pages to flows. What he means by that is, if you go back in the internet age, or even before that, we used to have documents. There were a whole bunch of content packaged together that would be delivered as a whole unit. But then the internet changed that and turned it into pages, where through Google and search engines, other search engines, you could go and find like one page out of a whole document and just jump straight in. And now we're moving towards flows, which is like the third step in this devolution of content, you could say, or evolution of content, maybe, towards smaller and smaller chunks and towards more interaction, as I said also earlier. And that's kind of interesting to think about. It's probably worth reading if you haven't read it yet. And then the third one, and who knows this term? This is probably going to be this is I'm a bioengineer, so I'm an ant geek. So I'm crazy about social insects and thinking about parallels between the social insect world and our world. And this is one of those terms that has been that was discovered in ants, and that has been moving into our thinking about swarm behavior and distributed thinking, like leadership without leadership, or like distributed organizations and how they're able to get things done. Because if you think about it, how do ants get so smart? They're tiny, they barely have a brain, and still they're doing these amazing things like making nests with fungi room. Like they have agriculture. They had agriculture, I think, millions of years before humans even thought about agriculture. And they're this small and they don't have a brain. And it's not the ant queen that decides what happens in the nest. It's basically this population of organisms that have an emergent property, which is a form of intelligence. And that's kind of weird, right? And what's interesting is that the way they do this is indirectly. So they don't talk with each other to share information. They're changing their environment and putting down pheromone trails, like what you can see here. And through those pheromone trails, basically by the behavior of more and more and more ants, you get certain patterns that tell other ants what to do. This is how they do things. Now, there's two things we can learn from this for documentation. One is intelligence can and should be embedded in the environment. So I think we're talking about artificial intelligence becoming, everywhere, like getting everywhere around us in anything that we touch. I think this is what we're talking about here, what ants have done before us. The other thing, and that's at least as important, is that you don't need a master architect to create a really smart system. A solution can emerge. I think this is something that's really important to realize as documentarians, is that you don't have to build this artificial intelligence. You don't have to know how it works. If you can create the basic components for it, and if you can set up the proper Stigmergy system that will start reinforcing those patterns that are rising up, then that can be enough to build a really, really smart system that helps a lot of people. I think there's really uncanny parallels between the way ants look for their way through a food territory and the way people that are trying to solve how to deal with machinery kind of like struggle their way through to find out how it works. And there's some really interesting parallels, because maybe there's going to be even documentation that you don't have to write, because you can just look at what people are doing in your application or with your machine, and then extract documentation out of that. So there's a lot here. So and yesterday, one of these questions, the big panel discussion, right? Are we ready or aren't we ready for Industry 4.0? I think you can extend this. I think this is about more than Industry 4.0, which is basically about factories and how to build stuff. I think it's pervasive throughout anything that we touch that is technology. And as I said earlier, maybe DITA, like we have the problem of context, of user context that we need to address. But besides that, I think that a lot of the technology is already in place to be able to do really interesting things. The rest of the presentation, I want to talk about 6 technologies that I think could be useful if you want to do something like this, be it a chatbot or artificial intelligence documentation or Industry 4.0 or whichever of these things. But before we start, we don't need to be ready, I think. I think we can bootstrap ourselves. So I think that was my conclusion from the panel discussions. No, I don't want option A or B. I think the option is in the middle. We're not ready, but we are ready. And we just need to start doing stuff and it will work. And I think that is really clearly mirrored also in how I think you could build a conversational UI. Because the first thing you need to start doing right now, if you're not doing it yet, is to start measuring. How are people using your content? How are people using your applications? How many of you are using web applications or are documenting web applications? Yeah. So and how many it's more physical? That's the other half? Okay, so a little bit less. So with physical things, it's a little bit harder because you need to put sensors into the applications and you need the Internet of Things to be able to extract the data that you need. But for web applications, it's really straightforward actually, because you can just monitor what are people doing in my app, and then when do they go to the documentation, and what do they do there, and when do they go back to the app, and are they then successful in doing what they're supposed to do? And once you start measuring, you can start building these iterative loops where you can create some rules. Maybe that's even you don't need artificial intelligence to get started, because you can just create some basic rules that say, when a person does these things, then show them this content. Right? It's really simple. And I've got this model about interruption-based documentation, like Clippy. I won't go too much in detail here, but I've got that explained in my blog post also. That basically I think that we need to go towards a model where you have context-sensitive interruptions that look at people and kind of try to predict, are they going to be upset if I throw them a message into their face, like the problem with Clippy, or will they be happy because it's actually going to help them? And then there's a whole gradation in interruptions that you can scale between, more or less interrupting. And then once you got this circle going, I think you can start plugging in AI to automate it and to find patterns that you didn't even know that were there. So in terms of technology, these are the 6 technologies I was talking about earlier. Marketing personalization is a really interesting thing to look at because they've got some cool things with profiles, a little bit scary, but pretty cool for what we're trying to do. Graph databases, because they allow you to detect patterns. Minimalism and DITA, obviously. Well, maybe DITA, maybe not, we'll see. But definitely minimalism, because else the content doesn't work. Delivery, that we need APIs, messaging, and an embedded help. Let's start with marketing personalization. Who knows what this is about? You know, you've heard of this, marketing personalization? So only a few people, okay. So when you go to a tour operator, and the first time you visit the site and you get trips to Hawaii and you don't really like the sun, and after some clicking you end up clicking on some trip to Siberia, and the next time you visit and it's all Siberia on the front page, that's marketing personalization. This is huge. CMOs are spending incredible budgets on this. It's also very, very hard. But it's a tool that allows products to customize their online experience to users depending on their profile, being like, you know, are they, from what country are they? What region are they? What is their likely demographic? What IP address do they have? Where have they been before? And so on and so on. All this scary stuff that the cookie policy was designed for, that everybody just ignores. This is what this is about. And tools like Acquia Lift allow you, and this is kind of interesting, because you don't even need to change your system to be able to do this kind of stuff. Like if you have an existing site, you could just drop in some JavaScript and then replace content with other content depending on the context that the system is detecting. So I think that you could use similar tools to also embed documentation. So maybe you have microcopy that changes depending on the visitor. You know, this user gets technical documentation in the microcopy, and this user gets simple documentation because they're no developers. Maybe you could also use it to deliver messages. But and I think it can bring us quite far, but I don't think it can bring us the whole way, because marketing automation is built for more persistent patterns. So I think they have some transient patterns, but that's pretty hard to do. And what I mean with transient patterns is like this guy, well, he's not switching his tire, that's what I was looking for. But anyway, he's got a problem, he needs to solve that, he's going to go looking for information, and then he needs that very specific information. But next time he'll have another problem, and he doesn't want to see the same information for, you know, yesterday's problem. He wants to get the information for the problem that is current, like right now. And I don't think that any of the marketing tools are built for that, because they're not predictive, because they can afford to be responsive, just giving you the content that you were looking for before. Second, that's why I think this technology, graph databases, is very interesting. This is Neo4j. It's an open source graph database. This is a graph from the Panama Papers. Do you know, you familiar with the story? Basically, it was like huge. It was all over the place. A data breach happened in a lawyer company that helped companies with offshoring money. And journalists went digging through it, finding all the patterns, and then a whole bunch of politicians came floating up. And yeah, it's a very interesting story. They talk a lot about that at Neo4j because, you know, everybody gets excited about that. The interesting thing with this kind of tools is that you can build patterns that you're not familiar with. So you can just say like, well, this person came from here, and now we went there, now we went there, and they have these tags, and they're interested in this kind of stuff. and you can look for patterns that you don't even realize that you might need just by doing like queries for it. And so I think that's the technology to also investigate if you're looking at this. Because I think this way we would be able to recognize behavior that comes before a support request. So this could save a lot of cost if you can figure it out. Because you could look at, well, if users do visit this page and then click here, then they're very likely to be looking for this thing. So we can push them this content and solve the problem even before they pick up the phone. So I think that's what you can do with graph databases. So I think it might even help to measure and justify documentation efforts. Third one, minimalism and DITA. Here I removed the question mark. Like if you want to move towards streams and flows, you can't have, the wiki page. So there's been a backswing, well, at least what I see, like inside of the DITA community, you might not see this, but there's been a really powerful backswing towards unstructured text formats. Markdown is huge, and everybody needs to have a wiki, and it's easy to edit. The problem is that it's not structured, and like when it's unstructured and you get this 3-page blob, you can't go push that into your interface. It's just too much information. So I think streams will only be possible with minimalistic content. And a funny thing is that a few years ago I talked about adaptive content, and this concept that this was before, like this was the moment when mobile became really big. And everybody was like, oh my God, we need to reformat all our content because, it's made for these screens and it's optimized for these screens. And now we need to figure out a way how we can put it on a mobile screen, which is much smaller, and we have to do all this juggling. And then the answer from the CMS community was that the best way to solve that, this is what Karen McGrain was talking about, is to have adaptive content. And here you are, this is why you needed adaptive content a few years ago, because AI is coming and you need adaptive content again. Back then, we thought it was going to be Google Glass. That hasn't really materialized. Maybe a few of you are doing that for technical support, for overlaying VR on top of machines. We'll see. Might still become really big, but at least for now, it's a bit slower. But I think that AI might be the place where you need it more. Fourth is documentation as an API. Who does know what is an API? Like, okay. So there's some people. So APIs, if you don't know what is an API is a contract between two programmers that says, if you send me this request in this format, I'll send you this answer in this format, so that programs can talk with each other and we can integrate them with each other. And I picked this picture because I needed something. It was early, as I said. It's not perfect, but what I think we'll need to do is to make documentation available through APIs, so that a machine can say, oh, I've got this user, like, who's in this context. Can you send me some documentation? Because they're at this step. Like, what does she need to do next? And you don't want to send like a whole document. You want to send just that one step that needs to be done. So like moving from like disintegrating the documentation into smaller, really smaller chunks, and serving that through a programmatic interface, I think will be important. If you're familiar with APIs, then you know this kind of interface. This is a Swagger UI. So yeah, as I said, we'll need to be able to serve content much more granular and in the user's context. And this is what we don't know yet how to do. And I think that's, I still need to go talk to Jarno and about this, but I think this is one of the key things that we'll need to address in the coming years. 5 is messaging. And who's working on Slack at our company? This is a sing and dance session. Okay, not too much. Okay. So Slack is this cool thing that all the cool kids are doing in the startup community. It's basically, it's a chat protocol. It's kind of like Skype, but nicer and more persistent and easier to use. They set out, like their big thing is that they were going to eliminate email, which didn't happen. Probably have even more email now. But what's interesting is that they've made this really exciting experience that brought the technology IRC, which the geeks were using, into the mainstream. And now our company basically runs on Slack. We have, for every project we have a Slack group. For strategic initiatives, we have a Slack group. I can ping people through Slack. And it's kind of like our communication backbone right now. Now, the interesting thing was that Slack, when it came out, had this amazing onboarding experience, which was basically a conversation with software. We're just saying like, hey, welcome to Slack, and you know, this is what you need to know, and here's another thing, and here's another thing. And it did this thing that you also see in gaming, this onboarding tutorials, really, really well. And it turned it into a conversation rather than a tutorial. And a lot of people saw that and got really excited about it. And then you see it in other places popping up, like messaging is also being used more and more on websites to like contact sales, that kind of settings. To some extent to automate responses, right? If you have a specific question that's already known. But I think that it could also be used to deliver content that is triggered. So like user does certain things, and then content is delivered in like this help center specifically for that person with more intrusive or less intrusive triggers. And the last technology is embedded documentation. And you probably already know this, right? Microcopy and embedded help. What I've seen is that in the software community, documentation is moving more and more into the product. This is one of the responses to Agile, is putting more of the documentation into the product, and so that also customers don't have to go looking for it. And there's different paradigms. I won't go too much in detail. Again, this is in the blog posts. Contextual help snippets, mouse overs, and these walkthroughs. This is how I got excited about this stuff, because we'll build a product for this. But to recap, I think there's 3 design patterns that you should be aware of. This context shift towards a user and what that is going to do to your documentation. Moving towards flowing, and Stigmergy, one of my favorites. Second, in terms of technologies, there's these 6 technologies that I briefly addressed. For profiling, for behavior analysis, for minimalism, the delivery through APIs, messaging for bots, because there's some AI and natural language processing that can be done there. But maybe that's not even necessary, right? Because some of it, that's kind of like advanced stuff. And then the interruption model, how can you embed help and interrupt the user before they're going to fail? So if you want to read more about this, or kind of keep in touch and get a notification when we're doing stuff about this, we're talking with one customer who wants to do a pilot project with embedded help that is triggered this way. Then sign up for the mailing list. It's if you sign up, I think you get an automated mail with the blog post we've published before. And I'll also share the recording of this talk and my slides, my new slides, with that list. And that's it for my talk. Thank you very much. Questions?
So, no. Obviously, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I also see a fundamental problem. It's very, very similar to the problem I have with video as a delivery for technical information. There's a difference between experience and text. And text is an artifact. You can take it away, you can analyze it, you can slice it, dice it, read and bind it, just as you can with mathematics as you can with text. You can do that. I can't imagine performing meaningful mathematics in a streaming of formulae.
It actually, there's people doing that stuff. There's people doing. I saw a demo of somebody ordering online through, like, ordering a flight through a chatbot, and that's stuff that I would never have imagined that people would be doing. I've seen. So I think. Yeah.
But there's a level. So there's a level where experience is good enough, but I think there's a level where text historically has afforded an artifact that can be used for a level of analysis that is really moving technologically.
Yeah.
And I don't want to lose that. At the same time, I agree. I'm working in the same direction too. So it's just a conflict that
I believe I have the same conflict because I love reading books, and books are different. Books are very different from blog posts or tweets because they force you to load like a whole bunch of concepts into your mind, and then it changes you more than a blog post can. So I think that's what you're also talking about, is this like this immersive experience. So I think that we're probably going to have both immersive experiences and transient experiences, but I think that the backswing is going the other way, and it's going to be a lot more about transient experiences than about immersive experiences. We've been very bad at immersive experiences for documentation anyway. Very few people ever read the manual. So it's always been a problem. So I think that now we're going to have the technology to actually deal with that. Okay. Other questions? More? Yeah?
You made mention that you thought that augmented reality was slowing down.
No. Google Glass is slowing down.
Okay.
Yeah. So augmented.
There's a lot of augmented reality.
Yeah. No, augmented reality is still booming. It's still. It feels a little bit like the industry wants us to like buy in and really believe the whole thing. And there's a lot of marketing money being spent on pushing this technology into the marketplace and getting it going. I think it can still go both ways. I think most likely it's going to happen right now, but there's some technologies that have been around and that people keep saying like, oh, it's going to happen now, and then they recede a little bit. Now, I agree. Right now, it still looks like it's going to be there and it's going to be big.
There are still some technological problems to get over.
Yeah.
But it's being used right now, for example, by companies like Boeing to assemble aircraft.
Yeah.
And that's not a small application.
I know.
And there's a committee, there's an OASIS committee called the ARIB committee, Augmented Reality and Information Products, which is specifically dedicated to that, to building some best practices and guidelines. I'm on it. So.
I love it. It's really, really exciting, and I would love to have augmented reality glasses. Then finally something useful to do with these things. But
it's not only glasses. For example, there's companies that use workstations where it's all projection. For example. There are a lot of different ways to do it.
So I agree. It's really, really interesting technology, and I'm on the fence, and I'm I hope it, but I think that for a lot of people, AI is going to be much more urgent than augmented reality. I think, because I think the investments are much bigger.
Or rather, AR is going to be part of the AI.
Yeah. So I think that AI there's going to be breakthroughs in AI to deal with sooner than in VR for most of us. For the Boeings, rock on. It's great to see them pioneering it, but for a lot of us, it's too expensive technology because there's more involved. Okay. Other questions or remarks? Okay, then thank you very much.